How do you know when speaker toe-in is correct? This good question comes to us from Walter in Fort Worth, Texas. Now that I have my direct stream DAC and BHK preamps singing, I've been playing around with my speaker placement, good for you, to get the best imaging. It seems like an endless quest. I notice that the slightest changes can drastically alter the soundstage. Do you have any advice on test tracks and a proven process that one can follow to know that I'm getting the most out of the setup? Specifically, what should one listen for to know that the toe-in is properly set? Or is toe-in even necessary? What changes should one expect with this adjustment? Well, that's kind of a tough generalized question because toe-in is specific to the kind of speakers you have and to the way you want things to sound and a lot of setup procedures. So with speaker setup, it's, what do they say? Well, no, that's crude, but it's like opinions, right? You know, everyone's got one, right? Well, so everyone has an opinion on speaker setup. And I'm certainly no different. I certainly have my opinions on it. And generally, with most speakers that I play with, I don't toe them in very much. I start with them always straight ahead and then toe in as necessary. But that's not true with all speakers. For example, when we went to Chicago, the Exponent show a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago, I don't remember, we had our friend Sandy Gross's Golden Ear speakers. Now, Sandy, designed those speakers to be towed in. He likes that. He wants them kind of out to the edges and towed in, kind of like, I don't want to say headphones, but definitely pointed in at you. And that's the style that those speakers were designed in. That said, most speakers aren't that way. And much has to do with the on-axis and off-axis response, how much equal energy we have when we're off-axis. So off-axis means, I don't know if you can see this, there's a little, we're at Jordan Camper's, our engineering tech, we're at his desk. And you can see that, here's this tweeter and here's this woofer on this small two-way, right? Well, this tweeter is very directional, but it also has a pattern that goes out. And so if we put a microphone or our ear directly on axis, pointing straight at that tweeter, then we'll hear the bulk of its energy. But if we go off axis, which is off to the sides, does that tweeter sound fall off rapidly? Or has the designer crafted it such that there's fairly equal energy across a fairly wide range of off-axis and on-axis? And that has a lot to do with the designer, the speaker, whether you've got panel speakers or tweeter speakers. There's so many different kinds of speakers that it's really hard to say. But of the speakers that I've played with, of course, every Infinity product I've ever used in a speaker, Revel, Salons, Magnaplaners, Electrostats, Martin Logans, what other speakers have I played with? Vandersteens, Quads, Focals, von Schweikerts. I've played with any number of speakers, and pretty much all of them, my preference is no toe-in, or very little. So here's the quick process that I go through. If this were if we have, here's our room, and for Ohm's Law listeners, I'm just showing a piece of paper, and I'm going to just draw a classic triangle here with the listener at the apex of the triangle, the point of the triangle, and then it's fanning out to the speakers, which let's say the speakers are 7 feet apart. I don't know. Part of it's hard for me because I can just look at a set of speakers and tell you if they are set up right. But I've done this for 45, 50 years. So, you got to get good at something over a long period of time or give it up. But whatever it is that, let's say we got 7, maybe 8 feet of separation between the two drivers, the two sides, the left and right channel. And now we're going to be at the center and away from it in a triangular pattern. And that's where the listener is going to sit. So I always start to where they look for the room and how far away they are from me to be about, I should probably have some sort of formula, because I do it by eye. I don't want them all the way at each end of the room, because if I'm looking straight ahead, I want to be able to see those speakers. And if they're really far away, that's not going to work. So let's just call it good 7, 8 feet, right? So if that's how far away they are, and I'm a good 10, 12, 15 feet away from the speakers, I should be able to see them pretty easily. So they are then not toed in. So the tweeters are pointing straight out and brushing past my ears, if you will, right? So I start playing music, and we first focus on the center image. That's what's going to be affected most when we toe them in or we don't toe them in. And if the center image, and I start, and if you look up online, Paul's Picks, just type into Google, Paul's Picks PS Audio. You'll find a group, a dozen or so tracks that I like to use as demo tracks. And in there you'll find a couple of simple female, male vocals that don't have a lot of other stuff going on. And that's where I normally start with the vocal, because we all know the sound of the human voice, right? So that vocal is going to hopefully appear behind the loudspeakers and at an approximate height that's about right and fairly focused. Okay, you don't want a 10-foot wide voice that goes between the two speakers. So if it's not focused, the first thing I do is I'll move the speakers a little closer together, or I can pull them away from the rear wall and see how that affects it. And I try and get the voice to sound normal and behind the loudspeakers. And that's really the bulk of the testing. We don't have time to go through an entire setup process, though I promise at one point we'll produce a CD or something. We'll come up with a great way to walk people through setup, because I swear to God, setup is probably the single most misaligned, misunderstood process in our whole industry. And sometimes we get returns of products. We do this 30-day thing, take it home, play with it for a month. And I'll bet half of the people that tend to return their stuff don't really know how to set it up properly. And if someone were to go in and help them, it would like, oh my God, that sounds great. So let's not get off on that tangent. But someday I promise you we'll have something for you. If you can't, by moving them, you don't want to get them too close together, you'll lose all the sound stage. If you can't get it to where that voice sounds about right, you're going to have to start toeing them in a little bit. But don't toe them in too much, because while you can get the center image pretty perfect, you're going to start losing sound stage width and depth. So it's a combination of those two things. It's a brief explanation, but that's kind of how I go about it. All right, we'll talk more on this very subject on a future video or podcast. Thanks for watching.